Welcome back to On Listening. This is your host, Daniel Rosen. Our next guest on Listening is Doug Braun Harvey, a friend and colleague. Doug is a retired psychotherapist, sex therapy supervisor, teacher, author, and I've read several of his books, and consultant, and all-around wonderful person, and in particular, a fantastic listener.
Well, thank you, Dan.
I am so thrilled to have you on the show. I know you talk a lot about rethinking sex addiction and sex and drug linked behavior, and we might get into that. But I have to say that the reason I wanted you on is because I've done consultation with you and seen you present. I'm really interested in how you listen and what you do when you listen to people.
Thank you. It's a great invitation for me to think about that part of myself. And as I've been preparing for the podcast and your invitation, I really appreciate your invitation because it's made me want to become more observant and thoughtful about what is important to me when I listen. And so the question is really interesting for me.
I'm gonna step out on a limb and suggest that you're a pretty good listener. So I'm tempted to think that it's kind of reflecting on what you do. Like if you watch yourself ex post facto, run the little Doug tape in your head. What did I do there? What justified that? What was I thinking? What do you notice? I'll tell you, I'm happy to throw some things out, but what do you notice when you reflect on what you do?
Well, the first thing I think about is where I'm listening, who I'm listening to. I think I've had to learn where to listen in certain situations and how to listen differently in certain situations. So like already listening to you, I'm listening to your voice. I know you personally. I know what it's like to be with you and sit with you in a variety of situations. But right now, I'm tuning into your voice. I'm not thinking about Dan, what he looks like on his face, or I'm not taking into what maybe your body or position may be, or what you're wearing, or those are all things that are other ways of listening. That's a message you take in. So I'm sitting here going, okay, I'm going to really listen to Dan's voice because that's what I have. I think that's one of the first things I do. Where am I going? What am I tuned into? What form of communication am I going to listen to first?
I'm going to throw out a term that, context. And you told me before the show that you're the first guest who's listened to a previous episode. You told me you listened to the Peggy Kleinplatz episode, and she talked a little bit about context and, how that determines sort of how we listen.
Yes. The other thing is there are ways I listen that if I were to do that with friends or family or out at a party or just, talking with people socially, I think it would be very alienating and distancing.
I know.
And so there's one of the ways to listen is to listen to the experience of being a poor listener, and taking that in and remembering it.
Ooh, that's cool. Okay, dive in a little deeper. Give me
Well, I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you're talking with somebody and all of a sudden you just notice their eyes aren't moving very much. And they kind of have just that tiny little glossed over look. And they're patiently waiting for you to just stop talking.
I have seen, and I have also been. I've been on both sides of that.
Right. And so for me as a listener, I think, okay, what was I doing? What was I saying? What created a sense of that person wanting to move just a little bit more away from me rather than closer to me? And so as a listener, I'm very interested in, first of all, what did I do to create this person wanting to initially have interest with me, and yet there's something happening that they're moving away?
Yeah. So right. One of the things I'd notice about you is you catch small changes in attention, use of language, and you comment on them quickly. And I'm almost hesitant to say this because you'd say, no, Dan, I don't do that. And I do full disclosure, I do the following. Is it true sometimes you interrupt someone because you want to make sure you get to the small thing you just saw before they move on to something else?
Well, if I do that with friends, that's not endearing. But if I do it in therapy, it feels like love.
Please talk about that. Because, okay, pop psychology idea. How could a good listener possibly interrupt, right? I mean, that's probably the trope out there, the idea that a good listener wouldn't interrupt. But I agree with you. Sometimes we have to interrupt. Well,
a group therapist that I trust immensely, Irwin Yalom.
Oh, goodness, yes.
Taught about group therapy, and he taught people to be group therapists. And he said, when I supervised group therapists, the minute I saw them doing something, I would interrupt them, because if I didn't, they just kept doing the same thing over and over again. And that's a bit sadistic, to watch people do something over and over again that's not really helpful, and they're trying to learn.
Oh, right. It's sadistic to let them dig their own grave, so to speak. Yes.
Yes. That's not helpful. I don't think it's kind. And so when I'm sitting in therapy as a psychotherapist listening, and I hear something that my training, my background, my decades of sitting with people, at this point it was decades of sitting with people as a psychotherapist, and I know something about those 4 words they said, that if I move in and ask for something more specific or clear or point it out or get curious or ask something about those 4 words, I know through my lived experience that I believe they're going to have experience of me listening to them in a way they're rarely listened to, yes, even though I interrupt them.
I couldn't agree more. I know that mode in myself, and I think, again, oh boy, referring to working with clients, but that's kind of what I do a lot. There's some people that I know that they have a lot to say, and they kind of have to just talk. And if I interrupt, I broke the narrative, and it's kind of like they got to go back and start all over again. And that's one mode, kind of a long distance listening. I'm looking for the very long wave. What's the arc? It might be a 20. It might be a wave that there's only one peak over 20 minutes, and then other times I'm like a mosquito, and that's just very quick. What was that? Where's that? And I know you're the master of that kind of in and out. What was that? Where was that? Tell me about that moment.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say the master, what are you saying?
Oh, goodness. I am saying it's a compliment that I appreciate it. It was a little jarring at first. Uh-huh. And then it grew on me. Mm-hmm. And it validated the way that I knew I would be sometimes. I think it helped me recognize that there's a mode that I get into sometimes, and seeing another person do it well, at least in my mm-hmm. judgment, that's what I mean by the master, was validating for that.
So what I think I hear you saying, Dan, and I'm just sort of thinking this aloud with you as I said it, as soon as you said what you just said, the thought that went through my mind was perhaps being listened to well for some people is a jarring experience at first. Maybe they don't have a lot of experience with it. Maybe their body doesn't really know, or maybe they don't feel a familiar sensations in their body when they're listened to. And so when they have these sensations, their body's like, what's that? Or maybe they feel something when they're looking at somebody in their face, when they're being listened to. And it's an unfamiliar experience to feel this way, gazing at another person. This is what happens when people feel listened to. And I like to think about the fact that possibly being listened to, really listened to, is not as common as we like to think.
No, I think that's true. I mean, my quick association to that is this idea that we're in our silos. There's the conservatives in one silo, the liberals on the other silo, and that there's a lot of talk going on within each silo, or I could imagine there's a lot of talk in the silo that I'm not in, and that there might not be a lot of listening in that. There's certainly a lot of talk and a lot of promulgating, but how much actual listening there is a good question.
Mm-hmm. You know, I wish I was better at that. That's an area of listening that I continue to be disappointed with myself. Is listening when a person carries a perspective that is so foreign, so different than mine, that I find the ways I know how to listen and be curious or interested, or and genuinely be interested. Isn't necessarily what creates connection. And I get befuddled by it. I'm not quite sure where the listening space is.
I have to say I got a little distracted because I made a decision when you were talking out myself as getting that glazed look in his eye. I had this, I'm going to put out a name. So I talked about politics. You echoed that. I'm going to put out a name. It would be an honor of my life to interview Alan Alda, who is working on a project right now of helping sort of heal the divides by listening. And he talks about how listening to people with opposing points of view can, if I remember the short interview I heard with him, it can change you. You have to be vulnerable. It can change you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think good listening does change us. I mean, when we're listened to, we experience ourselves differently. When we listen to others, we have to take something in. We have to digest something that we didn't know was going to be offered as a meal.
Right. And then it becomes, we unconsciously integrate parts of that. And it does change us.
Yes.
So if we don't like a particular, I know there's things that I have a strong opinion about, and it's self-protective perhaps to not listen to someone who has a strong opposing point of view, protecting some fantasy of yourself as unchangeable or rigid in a certain way of being.
So I just want to interrupt for a minute. That I think perhaps what you're saying is part of listening, I'm going to propose, is being aware when we're choosing not to listen.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to listen right now. I don't have the energy to listen. I don't have the motivation to listen. I don't have the emotional sustenance. I don't have the energy right now. I'm bringing up a sort of self-protective part. I don't want to listen because something will happen to me if I do listen. Oh, that's different than what I was saying. I don't want to be changed.
Right.
There are lots of people who they're at a certain moment in time for a certain thing don't want to be changed. Like I want to keep eating artichokes. I don't ever want to change my mind about eating artichokes. So I'm not going to change my mind about eating artichokes. So I'm not going to listen to people about something about artichokes that would make me not want to eat them anymore. I'm not going to listen to that.
It's funny. Given the field you're in, it's funny you chose artichokes. I'm not going to. I'm going to keep doing that thing.
I just walked by a garden a half hour ago while I was listening to this podcast, and they were growing artichokes, and I was just pleased at seeing the artichoke plant. So there it was in my mind.
Yeah, I'm in Rochester, and you're I don't remember what city you're in.
I'm in San Diego.
San Diego, very nice.
The plants are growing here, and it's springtime.
Doug, you've treated a lot of people who've been therapy clients and supervisees. But for the therapy client part, tell me, is there a tip for the client, right? Like we're involved in a lot of keeping up with how the field of sex therapy, group therapy, psychotherapists are training ourselves. But like what information is out there for clients who in terms of finding a therapist, in terms of the experience, I'm wondering if you, in terms of listening.
Tell your therapist when they're not listening to you. No, you missed that. That wasn't right. No, you didn't get that. No, that's not it, Doug.
Yeah.
Those are such important moments for me that I remember. I'm flooded with memories of moments when I felt honored and trusted that person who's coming to me for professional help has a relationship enough with me that they can look at me and say, "You missed the boat on that one. No, that wasn't it. Try again."
Yeah.
And that's essential. If you can't say that to the person you're paying for to listen to you, I mean, no different than your doctor. If you're going to go to your doctor's office and the doctor hasn't listened to you, you need to be able to look at your doctor and say, no, you didn't hear me. No, that's not it.
Well, I hope it's different. I think that the standard of listening is, I hope that people expect their psychotherapist to listen more than their physician.
It's not about expecting the other person to listen. It's expecting yourself to be able to tell somebody when they're not listening.
Yeah. And it's hard. There's all kinds of power dynamics. And you said the person you're paying some people I see, they're not paying me. It's the state insurance. And that maximizes a power dynamic, I think, of people feeling they have to sort of take what they got as opposed to ask for more.
So do we say to people somehow that you have the right to be listened to if you're in a particular economic position, or if the power dynamics are such around money exchange, somehow you have purchased the right for me to be a better listener?
Yeah, it has to be more explicit. I think the more bigger the power differential, the more it has to be explicit.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
What else is coming to your mind about listening? Do you have a person that you idolize as a listener? Or
my husband.
Well, tell us.
He's taught me a lot about listening, slowing my pace, moving into places of listening where I have less skill than other places. I didn't grow up in an environment where listening was modeled hardly at all. So I've spent a great deal of my life learning how to do something that was not really done very much, but I hungered for it.
You hungered to be heard, to listen, or to listen to others, or both?
I hungered to be a better listener, and I hungered to be in interactions where I was listened to as well. Both. And I think my way in was to be drawn to people who were open to listening to me. That was the first thing. And then I had to learn how to be a better listener.
I think it's lovely that you're married to your listening idol.
Really, it's true.
It's a great place to be.
Yeah. I've learned. I mean, we've been together 32 years, and it's been like a immersion.
Huh. Anything else that comes to mind as you reflect on listening?
I'm going to talk about my role as a trainer, a teacher, where I have a different way of being with people, where I have information, I have some knowledge, I have some sort of perspective or information that people are wanting me to provide for them, and they want to learn.
Yes.
Is in those environments, I've had to listen through a lot of other things than what people say. I've had to listen to what people wear to these trainings and in places. I've had to listen to where people sit. I've had to listen to the props that people bring for the day. I've had to listen to the way people sit at the table and what they put around them for the training for the day. I've had to listen to whether they're on time or not. I've had to listen to their facial expressions when I say something. There's a whole way of listening that has nothing to do with words.
Yes. Now so would you default to calling that listening? Like, because this is the On Listening podcast, are you calling that listening because that's where we are right now? Or is that how you think of it?
No. That is listening to me. Yeah. It's, does it sound strange for you?
No, so this theme has come up through some of the other episodes, and
which theme?
Listening is more than auditory. Listening is not just about words; it's about so much more. And I had a thought that there might be a better word. Maybe it's me that I'm pinned to thinking of listening as auditory. We've got 5 senses or something like that, and listening happens to the ears.
This may be why you're doing a podcast and I'm not.
Yeah. And the word that came to my mind a little bit was experiencing, but it's a hokey and it's almost too broad. But yeah, okay, so that's listening for you. I think it's...
Well, let me draw the distinction. I can walk into a training room and I can experience all sorts of things, but am I listening? I mean, a person their table's all cluttered with all sorts of stuff. I can see their clutter, but am I listening to what that is?
Okay, right. There's a reflective attention that's involved.
Reflective attention. That's right. It's a part of my listening is reflecting, is organizing the experience that's being sent to me, and without it being words. Words is just another thing we have to organize.
They are. I'm doing that right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do that. I find I want to tell people where my brain is when I've broken the connection with them. Tell them I'm thinking, or say, hold on, I'm trying to remember something.
Now, what my thought for you is you've chosen to listen to something else.
Yeah, it's really, so this is a hard thing to do. I want to ask a good question. I want to hear what you say, but I also have to listen to what comes up inside me. I can listen, if I were to only listen to what you say and wherever my full experience, I can't see you right now, but I'd have a more in-depth listening experience if we were face-to-face. If I only pay attention to that and I don't leave little cracks for me to do my self-reflection part, then I heard you, but it didn't land. I didn't derive any data from that.
Okay, right. So listening is more than just a kind of recording of what you're taking in.
That's right. Here's a little tip for all you people who are taking a class. The research last I checked is don't take notes by computer, because you can type so fast, you try to do it like a stenographer, whereas the old handwritten note, you had to reflect and process, categorize, synthesize, decide what's important, what's not important, and only write the good stuff down. And people who take handwritten notes do better than people who type. That reflective capacity. And we are doing that in listening. We're choosing what's salient, what's relevant, what am I going to focus on?
That's right. And so I think you're helping me get clear about another thing about listening is when I'm listening, I am trusting a kind of notice that goes on in me, like, oh, there it is. That's something. That's what they're trying to say to me. Or maybe that's the point. Or that's what they're wanting me to hear. Or that's what interests me to go further in the discussion. That I'm listening to either a somatic experience in my body that kind of goes, oh, that's exciting. Or I'm listening to a kind of energy that I'm experiencing between me and the other person, like, oh, more, do that. Yes, just right there. So I'm listening to the kind of the the exchange that says more.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's a part so there's something that's already resides within you that's echoed, amplified. And there's a parallel process here. You said, I was saying something that helped you get clear on this thought. And the thought is, there's things inside me things other people say that help me get clear about it. That's what us therapy folks call parallel process, I think. Very nice.
But I also, as a listener, I have to be. This comes from a coaching suggestion I was given in writing that somebody told me early on when I was writing my first book is don't fall in love with a single line you've written. And I think from listening, I have to be willing to discard what I thought I heard when the person who's speaking to me wants me to hear it differently, or that wasn't quite it. One of the things I'll see happening when I'm not as good of a listener is I'm sort of married to the idea I thought I heard.
Oh yeah, isn't there some theory behind that? I mean, you trained decades ago, and as I did too. Isn't there some? You tell me if you don't recall this or have this idea. There's some idea that the first thing you say is like maybe you're unguarded, unconscious, and that's what you should really honor as the truer thing, as opposed to the second or third thing, which might be spun to sound a certain way or to prove something or something like that.
I've never heard that. It's not something I carry around as something to guide me. What you just said, it's not a notion I carry. In fact, I kind of have a different idea of what I carry because I'm a sex therapist. I work a lot with sexuality. I work a lot with a part of human life that people are less confident, less experienced, and less certain about their language and even how to be in the space where their sexual life is being discussed. And so I oftentimes think the first, the second, or the third thing they say is what society has taught them is acceptable to say, the only language they have, what they're going to choose that word because it makes them feel less uncomfortable. It may not be accurate. So I have a very different idea about that whole notion you just said when it comes to talking about the vulnerable parts of our lives that we're less experienced being listened to. Is we're right out of the chute, we're going to say it oftentimes very poorly. And I don't think that's necessarily the authentic thing at all.
That's super helpful for me because I do have an idea that this, and maybe I created it myself. I don't know. I think it sort of parallel to the idea of the Freudian slip, that the first, you said that must be what's really on your mind. And I really like your reframe on that people, when they're talking about new ideas, vulnerable things, identities and ways of being that they're less familiar with, they're aspiring to something else, that there might be many times that the idea wasn't expressed in the most complete or most effective form. That's really cool.
So how do we say something well the first time?
Yeah, often we don't.
So one of the things I'll when this is now I'm moving to the therapy office as a therapist and I worked a lot with men, almost exclusively with men the last 20 years of my career. Men particularly who had concerns about their sexual behavior. And we would talk about feelings and thoughts. And I would ask men, what do you feel? And they'd give me a thought. And I'd say, well, that's a thought. What do you feel? And then they'd say something else, and that would be an opinion. And I'd say, well, that's an opinion, but what do you feel? And they'd say, well, I don't know what I feel. And I'd say to them, guess. And the first 20 can be wrong.
Yeah.
That I just wanted them to listen to the part of themselves that might be trying to tell them what they feel. Just try listening and not worry about doing it well.
That's a super charitable way to look at people and listen to them and help them find a stronger sense of themselves, to almost anticipate that the first couple of times it's not going to be authentic, or it's not going to be as true as it could be. I like that. I'm going to try to keep that with me.
Yeah, no, I have a little bit of I felt a little bristle when you said charitable.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't sit well with me that was being charitable. I think that's me wanting to let the person know I'm really listening to you, and I haven't hurt a feeling. And I don't know if that's being charitable as much as it's being insistent.
Oh, I think it. I meant. I like that you caught the word. I meant charitable, that they haven't learned how to do this yet, as opposed to they don't know a more non-charitable. Oh, they're not good at that, or they'll never get there, or
well, that would be judgment. In my mind, that would be a judgmental thought.
Yeah.
So perhaps you were saying I'm less judgmental in that place.
Well, you
rather
have
than charitable.
Charitable does add a hierarchy to a concept of expansiveness, that there's a more to come, that there's growth and development. And I was injecting a better than and a less than in that.
Maybe that was what my reaction to the word charitable.
I think so. Yeah.
It's also a word. I don't know if that's a word I use. So that might have been part of my reaction as well. It's like, oh my God, well, how would I ever use that word?
Oh, I could tell you how I use that word.
Right. But that's just the difference between you and I. So now I'm understanding why I had this kind of like, oh my gosh.
Well, you detected a judgment in that, and you were trying to get at a pure experience. What is this person feeling, and how long is it? I'm going to stay with them. I'm going to love them enough to get to the point where they're more fluid with that, and I've helped them, and they've come to a place where they can identify their feelings and put them into words. Mm-hmm. And that could be a week. That could be 6 years.
So I'll tell you about listening recently. A friend who I care a great deal about in this age of COVID wanted me to listen to their fears of how I was choosing to move in the world with the virus differently than they were. And it was a very vulnerable conversation. They needed me to know and hear how hard it was to watch me make a different choice than they would have. And the fear was I wouldn't listen, that I would be judgmental, I would, be dismissive, I would, whatever. And the vulnerability that my friend had in wanting me to just hear their worry and fear of watching me make a choice that for them made them worried for me. And they really wanted me to just listen.
Well, the intensity, I think I imagine that person had an agenda, and I really don't know the person. But when I hear that kind of a story, I imagine that maybe they had an agenda to get you to change your behavior, not just listen. But you were there. Maybe I'm anticipating.
See, now one of the things I think, I'll give you another tip about listening. I notice a lot of times when I'm in a conversation that a person who's listened to me say something will describe an idea they have about another person. Like you just described a whole idea you had about this person.
I did.
And what I was wanting you to hear was what I did, not who they are.
Well, tell me what you did. I don't know what you. It's all right. I thought about that too. I felt like there was a part I either didn't hear or we didn't get to yet. But what was that like for you? So
what I did was I decided that what I needed to do to be a good friend, to love my friend, was to listen to my friend. Mm-hmm. Not have a story about my friend and why my friend was wanting to have this conversation with me. Listening, I think, requires setting aside stories we tell ourselves while we're trying to listen to somebody. We have to let go of our story and listen. Hear what they're wanting to say.
Yeah.
Which means putting aside that part of our mind that in an instant tells us a story that we think is the right one. about this person.
And so you would have, I would have been listening to you differently if I didn't have that story, if I didn't sort of build a little story in my head and just waited for you to tell the next part, or said, and what did you do? I'm curious about your reaction to that. What was that like for you?
Right. Because I was wanting you to hear something about me, not about this other person. I had to tell you what this other person wanted, but I was in this position of having to choose to listen. And that the person had this idea that would be a difficult place for me to move into, that where I would go instead would be judging or having an opinion or being defensive or, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm really hearing a person wanting me, or somebody who cares about me, or we're friends and they really want me to listen, I have to kind of move into a mindset that says, I'm not going to listen to all those other chatters that come into my mind while I'm listening to them, and just try to listen to what they're saying, and not make up stories about their motive, and not make up stories about what they're really trying to say, but just listen.
That's a conscious choice.
It's a conscious choice. It's like, I'm going to go into the living room. It's a conscious choice. I'm not going to the kitchen. I'm going to the living room. It's that conscious. Listening is a place we go to, and there's certain things you do. And as my friend was describing all this to me, was all I wanted to do was hear what they wanted me to know, and let them know that I was, touched by their wanting to reach out to me.
Yeah. How did it go from there?
We continued to talk. We continued to talk about how difficult it was for this person to say this to me. Eventually, at some point, we got to a place where the person was able to be honest with me about some opinions and judgments they actually had about me and the way I was making certain choices. And it was like, oh, good. Now I know this is what you needed me to hear, that in your mind is having these judgments about me. And you needed me to hear that, and that our friendship can be part of that. I left it feeling good about being a friend who listened. And I had no idea I was going to tell you this story. It was just sort of like, it just, there it was.
We started with the context a little bit and then intentionality, and that optimal listening might happen when we are careful about, when we pay attention to putting ourselves in a frame of mind for listening under those conditions with that person in different ways, discarding certain things that might not be relevant, adhering to things that are relevant, and that shapes the experience of the person feeling satisfied that they got everything out they needed to get out, and satisfying for the listener to help.
Yeah, I did leave satisfied, Dan. I felt good about who I was as a friend, as a listener. Did I have to agree? Did I have to, have the same idea she was presenting to me? No.
Yeah, of course not. Right. I'm not sure how this is going to go, but let's see.
Okay.
Doug, do you think that there is a dark side to listening? Does listening ever get us in trouble, cause a problem?
Yes. Like you said, not everybody wants to be listened to. Not everybody wants to have a moment where the expectation is to be listened to. Some people want an audience, a spectator, not a listener. And when I move into listening and they're really just wanting an audience, it's a bristly moment. It's a miscue.
Yeah.
And I have to look at why am I always needing to be a listener or to move into that place? Why can't I just be a good audience member?
I think I'm needing an example to get a better understanding of that, or a hypothetical example.
There can be a circle of friends, and everybody's just laughing and, telling jokes and, funny stories and, blah, blah, blah. And, and I'm the one who'll stop and say, well, what did that feel like for you when that happened?
Okay. Got it. Yes.
And it's like, it's a buzzkill.
Right. Okay. What about, do you think that a person who's listening ever subjects themselves to harm? Is there a dark side in that regard, that tuning in and listening carefully might not be so healthy?
Here's just where I go.
Yeah.
For people who would want to exploit me, and use my need to be a listener or my need to be listened to, to exploit me, to take advantage of that. There are people who are antisocial. There are people who are exploiters. There are people whose intentions are to do something that's going to improve their lot and not necessarily care about how it affects you. This is a dimension of human behavior. This is not, this is just another part of the bell curve of who human beings are. And, people who do this amazingly, great listening, might be doing that to predatorily gain access to you for some sort of sexual crime. But boy, they're great listeners. And in fact, their listening capacity might be the very thing that gained them access to somebody to commit a sex crime with, because that person's never been listened to in quite that way. And it's a skill of a predator.
Yeah. Right. That last sentence kind of sticks with me, that perhaps listening is sometimes the skill of a predator or an exploiter.
Well, I don't think it sometimes is. I think that's a necessary skill to be a predator. That
kind of predator. There's other kinds of predators that predate.
Not somebody wants to engage in non-consensual forced sex or exploitive sex or things like that. They have to have a listening capacity to gain access to somebody who they could eventually harm.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up.
Can I tell you a story when I was a really bad listener?
Please.
Modeling
vulnerability.
I gave a plenary at a conference a couple of years ago. There was maybe 500 people in the room. It was a luncheon plenary. And I was the plenary speaker at the luncheon. And I gave a talk that was maybe a 35-minute talk. And at the end of the talk, I look up, and literally, Dan, there was a wave. I've never had this experience in my life before. A wave of people standing up, applauding, and making sounds. The whole room filled with applause and sounds at the end of my talk. And I could not get off that stage fast enough. I literally like ran off the stage and went to where I was sitting at the front table with some people, including my husband and other friends. People did not stop applauding when I went to the table. I had to stand. I didn't have to, but I realized until they knew I was listening to them, they weren't going to stop.
Oh, yeah.
So I stood up and waved, and it calmed down. We're at lunch. Later in the afternoon, I was having a conversation with my husband. And he's a good listener. And he said, help me understand why you walked off the stage so fast. And this is literally the thought that went through my head. I have been greedy enough to have them listen to me all this time. I need to get off the stage right now. And so I was
Oh.
listening to that voice instead of listening to them. So I ran off the stage. So my husband, this is why he's such a good mentor to me. He looks at me and he says, well, Mr. Sexual Health Conversation, in this very way that only a partner can speak with one. He says, for somebody who prides himself so much on conversation, he said, did it ever occur to you that they listened to you for 40 minutes and now it was your time to listen to them?
What a great way to look at it.
And applause and that warmth of the response to my time with them was my time to listen to them, which means you stay on the stage and you stand there and you let them speak to you and listen. It never occurred to me that moment in human exchange was time for me to listen. And it changed me, cured me, boom, that's it, I was cured. Literally, instant cure. I have never done a similar behavior again because I value listening so much. And so when somebody I know mentors me, who I trust, and pointed out to me that I was not a good listener, that's how I become a better listener.
That is just a lovely anecdote to end on. That is, I've seen you give a plenary and there were lots of applause, and yes, it's a nice way to think of it. That's the more accurate way to see it. That you were listening to them. That was your time to listen to them.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Doug. It's been a pleasure, and teaching me in the moment. I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Thank you. And I guess I want to thank you because the topic of your podcast, I think, is marvelous. I was really drawn to this conversation, and that's why I wanted to listen to one of the podcasts first. It was such an original and meaningful idea to have a podcast about that. I wanted to hear what a conversation about listening was like.
Yes. Oh, good. That just makes me kind of get those little tingles you get when something really nice just happened. Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
You're welcome. And thank you for asking me.
And that concludes another episode of On Listening. Again, I encourage you to visit our website, onlistening.net, and subscribe to the show. Send an email with a question, recommend a guest, recommend a topic, ask me a question. Be happy to respond. As always, or at least for now, On Listening is without commercials. I hope to continue it that way, simply for the joy of recording this.